Government Business Number 1, standing in the name of Senator Wong.
Thank you, President. I ask that Government Business Notice of Motion Number 1 relating to the consideration of a motion concerning Ukraine be taken as formal.
Is there any objection to this motion being taken as formal? There being none, I call Senator Wong.
I thank the Senate and I move the motion.
So the question is, the motion is moved by Senator Wong be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against, I believe the ayes have it. I call Senator Wong.
Thank you, President. And at the request of Senators Billick and Van, I move the motion on behalf of those senators. It is with sorrow and resolve that I move this motion marking 1 year since Russia's illegal and immoral full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Sorrow for lives lost, futures disrupted, civilians recklessly targeted by Russian missiles. The hunger and hardship deliberately inflicted on the vulnerable of the world by a criminal Russian regime, by the deliberate damage it has wrought on global markets for grain and energy. But the courageous people of Ukraine can do little with our sorrow. So I also move this motion to demonstrate our government's and our nation's resolve. As Olena Zelenska, Ukraine's First Lady, has said, we are not commemorating a year of war. We are celebrating a year of resistance, a year of courage, a year of solidarity, a year of Australia and our partners doing what we can to support the people of Ukraine. We have imposed travel bans and targeted financial sanctions on more than 1,000 of the individuals and entities in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We have committed more than $500 million in military assistance to Ukraine, including, most recently, $33 million for additional uncrewed aerial systems. In late January, I had the privilege of visiting the training grounds where the ADF personnel are training members of Ukrainian armed forces as part of a UK-led multinational training program. And we do many things in this job which are moving, but that was amongst the most moving of engagements I've had. I was deeply moved by interactions with the new Ukrainian soldiers who only a year ago were teachers, farmers, professionals and more, now standing ready to fight against Russian aggression. See, Mr. Putin and Russia have underestimated the courage of Ukrainians like these soldiers, and they underestimated the resolve of the global community. As I said in the UN last year, Russia is to be condemned for its illegal and immoral invasion, and it should be condemned as an attack on all smaller countries, because what it represents fundamentally is the assertion that a larger country is entitled to subjugate a smaller neighbour. On the 24th of February, Australia was one of 141 UN member states that again rejected this assertion. 141 countries voted in support of a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Only 7 voted against. Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine has prompted many of us to look back at our history, at the horrors in Europe and Asia that led humanity, that led the global community to establish the Charter of the United Nations. For many living through those times, it must have seemed that power and lies would succeed. In 1942, George Orwell published his reflections on the competing propaganda that swirled around the Spanish Civil War. He saw competing propaganda and lies, what we would now call disinformation. And he wrote of his fear that the very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world. But we know now that he was wrong, that the truth at great cost eventually won out. So I say this to Russia, and I say this to its apologists and to its cronies. Your crimes and your lies will not stand. And in fact, you have only strengthened our collective resolve. You see, we have reflected anew on the type of world order we treasure, the lives lived to potential, the dreams and ambitions fulfilled, and the common aspiration around this world that our children prosper in peace and live better lives than our own. Russia has reminded us again that these treasures, important to so many people around this world, these treasures are born of a system of rules and order respected by all. So 1 year on, let us commit anew to these rules and laws, and in doing so commit anew 1 year on to stand with the people of Ukraine.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Birmingham.
Ira Luniskaya is a young woman, a university student, a young university student with dreams and hopes. But Ira is from Mariupol. Ira is one of so many human faces with human stories that have been told as part of the bloody war that has struck Ukraine. Ira has buried her friend's parents, helped her disabled father to flee, seen her mother trapped in Russian territory, and lived on stinking mattresses in the basement of her former building. In Ira's words, "We lived in building number 7. There is no building left. I went to Mariupol State University. There is no university left. There is no city left. Putin liberated us from our home, from our studies, our work, our future." We in Australia, some thousands of kilometres away, care about the war in Ukraine because there are important principles at stake. We condemn the barbaric, illegal and immoral actions of Vladimir Putin and the Russian government he leads. To do otherwise would be to imperil us all by tacitly condoning the actions of violent autocrats. But amidst our important principles and our strong condemnation, we should remember Ira and the countless other stories of unnecessary loss and suffering. UNICEF analysis suggests that 80% of Ukrainian children are now living in poverty. These children are not just facing the obvious physical risks of war from shelling, firing and combat. Such children are not just facing the mental health scars that will stay with them throughout their lives. Their lives and long-term health are imperilled in other ways. The destruction by Russia of more than 800 Ukrainian health facilities mean children are missing out on vital vaccines that would otherwise shield them from future disease. And then there are the horrific instances of war crimes committed by Russia. The Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe has identified mass graves, massacres and torture chambers. In one of its reports, the OSCE spoke of the mutilated bodies of murdered men, women and children discovered in a basement. Some had their ears cut off while others had their teeth pulled out. Amidst such horrors and crimes, it would be easy to be despondent. But if there is one thing Ukraine has shown itself to be the antithesis of, it is despondency. Ukraine has come to be defined by defiance, stoicism, bravery, resolve and triumph. Putin expected a quick victory, but Vladimir Putin was as wrong in his military strategy as he is in his moral compass. This war was unprovoked, unjust and unacceptable. 31 years ago, the fall of the Iron Curtain, proud Ukrainians rose up, seized their national identity to once again recreate their nation. Using their rights under international law, Ukraine embraced their sovereignty, celebrated their nationality and built their nation. Though imperfect like all of us, Ukraine has much to be proud of and much to defend. Ukraine and Ukrainians can be especially proud of their defence of their nation. They and much of the world have been inspired by the acts of courage and bravery. Inspiration has come in many forms, most visibly the leadership of President Zelensky. As President Zelensky said, Ukrainians made a choice on the 24th of February last year, not of a white flag, but of a blue and yellow flag. He has spoken not only in defence of territory or people, but of principles, the right to self-determination, to security, and to live without being threatened. These principles form the basis of our call to arms, Australia's call to arms, even from the other side of the world. No small or mid-sized nation should tolerate seeing another invaded by or made subservient to a bigger or more powerful regional neighbour. In helping to defend Ukraine, we defend the principles, the norms and the international laws that help to defend Australia. The previous coalition government proudly stepped forward with $225 million of defence military equipment, $65 million in humanitarian assistance, thermal coal to support energy supplies and humanitarian visas for Ukrainians forced to flee. We applied financial sanctions against hundreds of Russian individuals and entities as part of coordinated action with like-minded partners. The Labor government has built upon this foundation with more support and more sanctions, and our bipartisan support for these actions is emphatic. We will continue to encourage and welcome further actions and encourage further humanitarian assistance for people like Ira and others, as well as encouraging the reopening of Australia's embassy in Kiev. If democracies have suffered from self-doubt in recent times, the Ukrainian spirit reminds us to have confidence in ourselves, confidence in the enduring nature of our values, confidence to speak truthfully about threats to freedom, and confidence to show resolve in confronting evil wherever it lurks. As we acknowledge this first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we say confidently, Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Senator Billy.
Thank you. On the 24th of February this year, the Ukrainian community throughout not just Australia but the world joined with supporters to commemorate 1 year since Russia's illegal and immoral full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I was honoured to be invited to speak at the Hobart rally and vigil. We couldn't bring on this motion that day because Parliament was not sitting. However, bringing it on today ties in well with this evening's launch of the Australian Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group, which I understand is now the largest friendship group in the Parliament. As chair of the group, I would like to thank those members and senators who have joined, encourage anyone who hasn't joined to join, and I'd also like to thank Senator Van for serving as deputy chair. I'm looking forward to the launch tonight and catching up again with the Ambassador of Ukraine, His Excellency Vasyl Miroshnichenko, with whom I have developed a great working relationship. I'd also just like to acknowledge two members of the Ukrainian community in the gallery here today. There are other members already in the building having meetings with various ministers and people, so thank you for being in the chamber. Thank you for coming to the Parliament. Please be assured you have very, very good friends in this place. It gives me a great sense of pride that Australia is one of the largest non-NATO contributors to Ukraine. We've provided $65 million in emergency humanitarian assistance and over $500 million in military assistance, with our most recent support including sending ADF personnel to the United Kingdom to train Ukrainian soldiers and $33 million in drone technology. Our significant assistance to Ukraine is complemented by actions to impose costs on Russia, including sanctions targeted against more than 1,000 organisations and individuals, and import and export sanctions against a number of commodities, including Russian oil, refined petroleum products, coal and gas. Our assistance to Ukraine has been maintained through the transition from a coalition to a Labor government and has continued to have bipartisan support through both. In fact, I understand it has the unanimous support of the Parliament, at least I haven't heard any dissent. There was no better demonstration of Parliament's support for Ukraine than when both houses gathered for a group photo with the Ambassador, in which the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition stood shoulder to shoulder with the Ambassador. That was an historical moment. The Australian Parliament has never done that before. But Parliament doesn't stand alone in its support for Ukraine. Our stance is a reflection of the overwhelming support of the Australian public. Australians understand that, even though we are almost on the other side of the world, Australia needs to be in this fight with Ukraine, not just for Ukraine's sake, but for our own national interests. Russia's actions threaten the stability of the rules-based order that governs international relations. Australians understand that Russia's actions are a threat to every country and the rules-based order that maintains global stability. I'm certain the assistance given to Ukraine and costs imposed on Russia by Australia and our allies have been instrumental in ensuring that Russia's invasion has been a monumental failure. But international solidarity with Ukraine is not the only thing holding Russia back from achieving its objectives. What is also standing in their way is the patriotism, resilience and fighting spirit of the Ukrainian people. I'm in no doubt that Russia underestimated the Ukrainian people and that they expected to be in a much better position than they are now. While the 24th of February marks 1 year since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it is the culmination of over 30 years of Russia's attacks on Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Since Ukraine gained its independence in 1991, Russia has interfered in the domestic politics of Ukraine, illegally annexed Crimea and backed separatist militias in the Donbass region, the very militias who were responsible for downing Malaysian Airlines flight MH17, murdering 298 people, including 38 Australians. Now, a lot of people know that my interest in this conflict, like our nation's, is motivated by an aspiration for global stability and security, but my interest is also very personal. My surname is Ukrainian. I have family ties with Ukraine by marriage, and my husband Robert, who is of Ukrainian descent, still has a strong connection to his Ukrainian heritage. We are both involved in the Ukrainian community and Tasmania and have been for many, many years. So we see and hear how Ukrainians are suffering, and it affects us deeply. So given this is personal, I actually have the following message for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Putin, the blood that has been spilled in this illegal and unprovoked invasion, Ukraine and Russia, is on your hands. You have failed to appreciate that Ukrainians are a proud people with their own language, their own culture and their own identity, who have embraced democracy and want to determine their own future. For this reason, your invasion will fail. That is inevitable. The important question for you is, how much more blood has to be spilt before that happens? I commend the motion.
Thank you, Senator Billick. Senator Van.
Thank you, President. And I'd like to thank Senator Billick for being chair with me of the Parliamentary Friends of Ukraine since I came into this place in 2019. We've worked very well together on this issue, and I do thank her for her hard efforts. While we're celebrating the anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, February 24, 2022, it can't be lost on any of us that this war has been running since 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. We've learnt lessons from that, as have the Ukrainian army. So where we're now seeing a complete rout of the Russian troops, they have effectively lost this war. They've certainly lost the war that they set out to fight, and that is to decapitate the Zelensky administration in Kiev and then go over and take over the country. That is never going to happen again. And why isn't it going to happen? Because like-minded nations have stood side by side with Ukraine and given them the arms, material, financial aid that they deserve. And they deserve it richly, because as we've seen, they've fought these fights. We've seen these Russian tactics before, whether it be in Aleppo in Syria, Grozny in Chechnya. But we've since gone on and seen how they fight a war of attrition in Mariupol, now in Bakhmut. These aren't new tactics for the Russian army, but they are tactics that are bound to fail as long as the West keeps on arming them, as long as the West keeps on giving them the weapons they need to fight the war. I've been saying for close to a year that the West needs to supply the main battle tanks and fighter jets. Thankfully, we've seen those main battle tanks promised, and some delivered. What we need to do now is convince our like-minded countries to send in those fighter jets that are so desperately needed for air defence and ground strike, to hit those dug-in trenches where the Russians are hiding away through this winter. As most of you will know, and particularly our Foreign Minister, I visited Ukraine in August last year. And it wasn't unauthorised. I was invited by the Ukrainian government. And it was an incredibly eye-opening trip. But I went for two reasons. Firstly, to go there, and I did a lot of interviews with media there, to tell Ukrainians that we haven't forgotten about them, that even a country as far away as Australia remembers what they're going through and are there to support them. But then also to be able to come home and say to Australians, we need to stand with Ukraine. I've seen the damage that this Russian army has done in Ukraine. It's not pretty. And I wouldn't suggest anyone go there just for sightseeing purposes. I went there and I saw the bushmasters that we donated that are being used in this battle and used incredibly well, and met with the troops that are using them. Sadly, now some of those troops are no longer with us. They've been lost in this war. But it reminds me every day that we in Australia and all our like-minded countries need to do more. We need to do far more. Yes, we've promised $475 million in military aid. Sadly, not all of that has made its way into the country yet. And I encourage this government to speed up those deliveries. On my first morning in Kiev, I went for my morning run and I ran past our embassy. We share a building with the Canadian embassy. You could see the Canadian flag flying there, the Australian flag's not there because our ambassador's not there. But the most important thing I learnt while I was there was the resilience of the Ukrainian people. Every person I met was waiting to be called up. Whether it be your taxi driver, the barista making your coffee, anyone you met in the street, everyone was saying, I'm up for this fight. I'm up for this fight and I'm dying to go. And every person I spoke to, and I think every person in that country, will fight to a person to defeat Russia. And we need to be doing our bit to support them. And we must. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van. Senator Steele John.
Thank you, President. War is a most terrible thing. And those leaders, so-called leaders, who would pursue wars of aggression, to dominate, to subjugate, to profit from their neighbours for political purposes, are committing in that act one of the highest legal and moral crimes possible in the human community. In their illegal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin and his regime have joined a dark pantheon of despots, of dictators, and sometimes of democratically elected officials who have committed such vile crimes. And in speaking to this motion today, I once again extend the solidarity of the Australian Greens movement to the people of Ukraine in their struggle to retain and to reassert their sovereignty, in their struggle to face down this vicious dictator and his brutal regime. In doing so, I also reiterate the cause of the Australian Greens for all nations party to the United Nations Charter to work collectively in accordance with Uniting for Peace Resolution number 3378 to deliver coordinated international support to the people of Ukraine. It is absolutely incumbent upon Australia to work as part of the international community to ensure that the words of solidarity that are so often and so easily spoken in political chambers throughout the world are translated into material action. Now, one of those ways in which those words must be translated into that material action is to begin now organising an international programme of debt relief for Ukraine, to support them in the urgent work that will need to be done for the rebuilding of their communities. Right now, as we sit here, the Ukrainian army is engaged in a great battle with Russian forces over the city of Bakhmut. Much has been said in relation to the military strategic value of this engagement and this location. But we must not forget that this is a town which before the war hosted 70,000 people. 70,000 people called Bakhmut home. And it is now little more than rubble. Should the Ukrainian army and their allies achieve their strategic objectives, should tomorrow the Russian forces be thrown back over the border, should Crimea be liberated, the very next day the residents of Bakhmut will have no more home to return to than they do right now. And there is a profound moment of danger for the people of Ukraine in that moment, in the aftermath of victory on the field, that the international community declares mission accomplished and moves on. We cannot let that happen. We must ensure that the Ukrainian government is provided with that plan of debt relief so that they can invest in the rebuilding of their communities and the re-knitting together of those communities. To be able to once again have the services and supports that people need to ensure that a state is able to function in a time of peace, to do more than simply deliver ammunition and materiel and troops to a battlefront. Because if we fail in that moment, if we turn away, if we say you've got your battle tanks, but it's a very hard conversation for us to have with the IMF or the ECB or global money lenders in relation to your national debt, then in that moment we will condemn Ukraine to struggle to re-establish itself as a sovereign nation and a functioning, peaceful nation. We will continue this work. We will continue to advocate alongside the Ukrainian community for these actions. And in closing, I'd say simply this: Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine.
Thank you, Senator Steele-John. Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the National Party, I rise to support the motion and honour the bravery and strength of the people of Ukraine who continue to courageously fight a war not of their making. A war President Putin expected to last just 3 days, which has now passed the 1-year mark in duration. This illegal, unprovoked and unjust conflict has resulted in the deaths of thousands of Ukrainians by Russian forces, according to the UNHCR, with more than 7,000 civilians killed and 11,000 injured, including 177 girls and 221 young boys. The UNHCR reported in September last year that 12.3 million people had fled the Ukraine, while 7 million had been displaced internally. That's 18 million Ukrainians that have left their homes. Many thousands more have been forcibly deported to Russia. Historic cities that have taken hundreds of years to build now lie in ruins. Ukraine estimates that Russia has caused $1 trillion US dollars worth of damage since the start of the full-scale invasion last February, and that it is not even allowing for the costs in Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, which were invaded in 2014. The Ukraine government has estimated that 150,000 residential buildings, 1,500 schools and 20,000 kilometres of roads have been destroyed. And Russia, in its indiscriminate attacks, has targeted hospitals, schools and energy supplies. Russia's blockade of the Black Sea ports is equal to economic blackmail, with some of the world's poorest people now paying higher prices for food, energy and the very means to survive. In the areas liberated from Russian forces, Ukrainians have uncovered mass graves as well as evidence of rape and torture on an unimaginable scale. It is President Putin who is responsible for this. He could stop it at once by withdrawing his forces from Ukrainian land, but he continues with his delusions of imperial grandeur and expansion. He blundered into a war that he cannot and will not win. Ukrainians were always going to resist a hostile attack aimed at wiping out their country, as Russia was warned that if they instigated the conflict, Ukrainians would defend their homeland ferociously, and they have. Today, Ukrainians are more unified, proud and determined than ever, and the overreach of Russia has united the world in the common purpose of peace and to defend the principles of the UN Charter.
all Australians remain united and resolute in our support for Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. And today, to be in the chamber and to hear the Labor government, the Liberal and National parties in coalition, the Greens, independent senators, stand as one, united in our support for Ukraine, is demonstration of what is occurring. This is a microcosm of what's actually occurred, particularly across Western democracies around the world. We as a nation are doing our part in helping Ukraine fight this illegal war and abate the global economic impacts Russia has caused. It was the former coalition government that stood with Ukraine 12 months ago, offering substantial humanitarian, economic and social support, and that has been continued by today's Labor government, and we thank them for that. We played a major role in food supply and fuel for Europe and the wider economic community. We've donated 70,000 tonnes of thermal coal to support Ukraine's energy security. We've banned the import of Russian oil, petroleum, coal and gas, banned the export of alumina, bauxite and luxury goods to Russia, and introduced an additional tariff of 35% on imports from Russia and Belarus. And we will continue to provide bipartisan support to the Australian government to ensure we provide more military and humanitarian assistance. Our former coalition government committed $285 million of defence military assistance, including 40 Bushmasters from my home state in Victoria, produced in Bendigo, and $65 million of the humanitarian assistance in Ukraine's fight for freedom. I'm proud to say that Bendigo Bushmasters have played a central role in Australia's military assistance. This is a David and Goliath battle, and as a middle power in the global order, Australia stood strong at the very start, and I think it was particularly our efforts at the beginning of this war that really, I don't think it was an assured assumption that everyone was going to come to the table 12 months ago and stand as united as the Western democracies in particular have against the aggression of this illegal war. So practically and philosophically, this nation stands with Ukraine. We stand for peace, but it's not peace at any price. The sovereignty of this nation matters, and we won't stop supporting them until they can be sovereign again and Putin and the Russian forces are behind their own borders.
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. Senator David Pocock.
Thank you, President. I thank the Senate for this opportunity, and I thank you, the fellow senators, for their contribution. We've watched on for over a year now at the horrors of the war in Ukraine, a country being invaded, a people fighting bravely and against all odds for their families and for their country. And the world has rightly grappled with what to do with such an immoral, illegal and unjust invasion. I believe we can learn much from the words of a moral giant, I believe, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German Lutheran pastor, who grappled with this question in the face of Hitler and what to do in that situation. And he has some wisdom, left some wisdom for us. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. The global community has made clear the condemnation of Putin's actions. We must call for an end to this war, and we must call for peace. We must stand alongside the Ukrainian people, and I'm really proud to represent so many people here in the ACT who have been protesting, have been fundraising, have been looking after Ukrainian refugees. Many of them have put their lives on hold to focus on this. And I'd really like to use this opportunity to read out some of the words from a few of them. The first one, Canberran Marisia Jakashin. My parents were forced to leave their beloved homeland, Ukraine, due to the twin horrors of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. They were never to return to their families. Our family arrived in Australia in July 1949. Australia provided a safe haven and hope to rebuild their shattered lives. My late parents worked tirelessly for Ukraine's freedom, sovereignty and independence. This was passed on to their children and grandchildren. The Ukrainian community in the Canberra region, with their loyal friends and supporters from many countries of origin, have protested for over 12 months every Saturday outside the Russian embassy, not just in support of Ukraine's fight for self-determination, freedom and democracy, but for that of the free world. I urge the Australian Parliament to continue to provide bipartisan support for Ukraine with humanitarian aid, military aid and economic aid. This full-scale war waged on Ukraine by the Russian Federation impacts on all of us. Thank you, Australia. Slava Ukraini. The next one is from Andrew Lisinski. We're 12 months into this war, Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian community here is still outraged about the invasion. Ukraine is a sovereign nation and is grimly defending that sovereignty. The Ukrainian community here and all over Australia and the rest of the world continue to protest this Russian aggression and will continue to do so whilst Russian forces are in Ukraine. Let's make no mistake, Putin is trying to destroy everything Ukrainian: identity, language, culture, religion, and cultural icons. But he will not win because Ukraine, led by President Zelensky, is strong in its resolve. Ukraine is determined to defend all things Ukrainian, and the world is showing massive support because this is simply wrong. Putin will lose and Ukraine will prevail. Lastly, a contribution from Dmitry Kun. Thank you, Australia, for supporting Ukraine. We must continue the support. Russia's disregard for international norms and laws must be stopped by Ukrainians now. Or else we may find that other dictators, inspired by Putin, start territorial conflicts and wars. That is not a good prospect. We stand with Ukraine and we call for an end to this war. Slava Ukraini. Clearly this is an issue that we need to continue to speak up about. I thank the major parties for their support of Ukraine at this time, and for the many thousands of Australian people who in their own way have protested or shown their support to people in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Pocock. Senator Goodell.
Thank you, Madam President. As we know, on the 24th of February 2022, after months of Western intelligence agencies' warnings and Russian denials, the armed forces of Russia invaded the lands of Ukraine. We saw on TV live pictures of helicopters landings in Hostomel Airport, armoured columns advancing on suburbs and cities, and the Ukrainian population filling bottles of Molotov cocktails, sending children away from their homes and arming themselves in response. In what was meant to be a 3-day easy victory, as we've heard, we're now only on day 377, and they retain control of a very small portion of Ukrainian sovereign territory. We have seen war crimes, we have seen targeting of civilians, we have seen and been reminded of the horrors of war over and over again in Bucha, in Mariupol, and now in Bakhmut. Even overnight, there is a video of a Ukrainian prisoner of war being executed on camera, whose last words are "Glory to Ukraine." But we've also seen the best of humanity. People coming together with unity of purpose, helping each other, protecting their country, their way of life, working to survive. Across the globe, there has been humanitarian and military aid in response to the needs of Ukrainians and their government. Just hours after the invasion, President Zelensky was quoted as saying, "The fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride." The world has heard that, and it has answered. The people of Ukraine, inspired by its armed forces and political leadership, turned the tables and drove the invaders completely out of Western Ukraine. With the famous tractor corps of Ukraine kept claiming hundreds of pieces of military equipment that could be repaired and then reused against the invaders. The world is not fueling Ukraine's ability to fight. Ukraine's ability to fight is fueling the world's appetite to stand up to what is right and what is wrong. I searched for better words than the German foreign minister, but I couldn't find them. And she said, if Russia stops fighting, the war stops. If Ukraine stops fighting, there is no more Ukraine. It is that simple. But this is not going to be a defeat of Russia. It is a defeat of decency. It is a defeat of diplomacy, and it is a defeat of humanity. We must do better. Russia had a right to its own security and to feel safe within its own borders. It does not, however, have any right to act with such hostility across and within the borders of another sovereign country. That is not the way to achieve this. To Russia, I say, tell the world what security you need to pull all of your forces and all of your arms back to the borders of 91. What can the world do to stop sending the sons of the Rodina to their deaths? What can the world do to halt your illegal and immoral corrupt slaughter of the innocent and the destruction of such beautiful, historical and productive lands? For it's not just the future of Ukraine you hold in your hands, it is the future potential of Russia. No one wants to see a generation of young men taken away from their families, their homes and their jobs. These men that Russia is sending to slaughter deserve so much better than that. The Stalinist phrase, quantity has a quality all of its own, should not be measured in body bags. This war must end because no one will win it. The war must end with guaranteed safety of Ukraine and Russia within their own borders. And in Australia, we've done our bit. We have sent our aid, we have sent our arms, we are sending our trainings, and we've sent our love and support to Ukraine. Respected, independent, open source intelligence site Oryx has observed the loss of 6 of our Bushmasters and 3 of our M113 APCs. It is likely there is more, but we have seen these put to action, and the crime is that people have died while they are in them. We must continue to seek opportunities to assist the Ukrainians. We must continue to seek opportunities to support peace. And when all of this madness ends, we must seek opportunities to support reconstruction and reconciliation. For the absence of armed conflict does not in itself represent peace. But the war rages on. People are dying today. They will die tomorrow. And the risk is we all become so used to it, we become desensitised to it, we stop caring and we stop helping. So I say to Ukraine, I will not stop caring. Australia will not stop helping. We must do whatever it takes to deliver peace to your country and your people. And please, until that day, stay safe, fight hard, and we salute you.
Thank you, Senator Goodell. Senator Scarr.
Thank you, President. First, before I make my remarks, I wanted to pay tribute to Senator Billick, my good friend Senator Billick, and also to Senator Van, because I think the way they have come together in order to provide leadership to the Friends of Ukraine is just an outstanding example of what this place does at its best. So thank you very much. President, on 25 February 2023, I attended a rally in King George Square in my home state of Brisbane. And in that place, in King George Square in Brisbane, the Ukrainian spirit was there for all to see and feel. It was there in King George Square. The spirit of freedom, democracy, sovereignty, a spirit that has survived the horrors of Stalinist Soviet Union, which survived World War II and which now, against all odds, is surviving. But also in that square with our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, were brothers and sisters from Iran, representing the Iranian community. There was our wonderful Vietnamese community, representatives of our African community, our Indian community. This was the best of Australia. This was the very, very best of Australia in that square in Brisbane on Saturday, 25 February 2023. And there were leaders from all major parties. Member Graham Perrott MP was there, my local member, and I was there representing the Coalition. Cameron Dick was there representing the state Labor government. David Crisafulli MP, the opposition leader at the state level, was there. The Deputy Mayor of Brisbane was there. There was unity of purpose in that square on that day. The very, very best of Australia. And I say to the Ukrainian people, please know that we are standing with you on this journey. We are standing by you, shoulder to shoulder, with you on this journey. And in doing so, we are standing shoulder to shoulder with everyone in the world who believes in freedom, who believes in democracy, who believes in a rules-based international order. And we are there for the long term for this journey until it comes to an end and peace and sovereignty once more reigns in Ukraine.
Thank you, Senator Starr. I ask senators to stand to assent to the motion. Thank you, senators.